There are 35 U.S. Senate races next year, some considered easy wins for one party or the other. Some will be more hard-fought. 3 are considered absolute toss-ups. In Georgia, Republicans are going hard for Democrat John Ossoff's seat. They'd like to flip the seat in Michigan, opening up with Democrat Gary Peters not running again. And in North Carolina, they're trying to hold on to the seat held by retiring Republican Tom Tillis. The candidate endorsed there by President Trump is former state and Republican National Committee Chair Michael Whatley.
North Carolina deserves a strong conservative voice in the Senate.
Democrats recruited former Governor Roy Cooper to run here in July, criticizing the Republicans' so-called big, beautiful tax cut and spending bill.
Ripping away health care from millions of people, all to give tax breaks to the millionaires and the billionaires, and it's not right.
Roy Cooper served 8 years as governor, 16 as North Carolina's attorney general, 14 in the state legislature. Michael Whatley has never run for office himself. He was chair of the North Carolina Republican Party and Republican National Committee.
What I've always wanted to do with the party politics was to make sure that we were getting the right people in office. And when Tom Tillis said that he was going to step back and kind of looked at the options that we had in North Carolina, and wanted to make sure that we had a candidate who's going to be in there, who's going to fight for every family, fight for every community, fight for the issues that really matter in North Carolina. Had a conversation with President Trump, who urged me to take a real hard look and get into the race. And that made the decision a whole lot easier.
Yeah, I think he said something along the lines of, you've earned your shot, go get it. North Carolina obviously considered a coin flip at this point. If you just look at the polls, I don't know how you feel about that characterization. But you're in a dogfight for your first campaign ever running for yourself. It's a lot of attention, a lot of money. It's a tough race for your first time out.
Absolutely. Look, you think about North Carolina, totally purple state, 30% Republican, 30% Democrat, 40% unaffiliated, which is our version of the independents. And every race is a battleground type race. Every race is going to be very close, very contested. Tom Tillis, who I'm running to replace, won his first election by 50,000 votes. He won his second election by 100,000 votes, so like 0.3 of a point, 0.6 of a point. And so, we know that they're going to be close. President Trump won all 3 of his races, but they were all very, very close, being that we're that battleground state.
One thing you don't have to worry about, presumably, no disrespect to anybody else who might be on the ballot, but you have a fairly clear runway next spring to be in the race next November, as does former Governor Roy Cooper for the Democrats. Now, he's obviously very well known, pretty well liked as far as I know. Now, that means he has a record to run on, means he has a record for you to run against.
It absolutely does. And it's a record that's really out of step for North Carolina. When you think about the issue sets that North Carolina people care about, they match up very closely with the election set that we had in 2024, right? So we want, to rebuild the economy. We want to make sure that our borders are strong and secure. We want to make sure our kids and our communities are safe. And we want to make sure that we're going to be respected around the world. North Carolina's got a huge military presence, veterans presence, so we're going to be focusing on those issue sets. And on every one of the major 80-20 issues that we're facing right now, Roy Cooper's on the 20% side. He has followed lock, stock, and barrel the Democratic machine at this point in time. So, he is supporting the shutdown. He is going to support, going after President Trump. He supports open borders and inflationary spending and a weak America. That agenda that the Democrats ran on in 24, lost on 24, they're doubling down. He's going to be right there with them.
And you've also called him soft on crime. Tell people about this just passed Arenas law that you say is a rebuke to that.
Well, it really is. You think about what happened in Charlotte, where we had DeCarlos Brown Jr., who had been arrested and released 14 different times.
Free on bail at the time.
Without bail. Right?
That's what I mean.
Yeah, and killed this young lady. He should have never been on that car, right? And should have never been in position. The reason he was on the streets is because in 2020, in the middle of his marching around Raleigh during the riots with Antifa and Black Lives Matter, Roy Cooper signed an executive order to reimagine law enforcement and create cashless bail and create the revolving door that put this guy back on the street.
And stabbed this, for people who don't remember exactly what we're talking about, stabbed this woman from Ukraine on a train.
Right, exactly. And so, when we go back and we trace the soft on crime policies that he put in place It's a direct line to this killing and many, many others that we have seen in Charlotte and frankly across the street. So, I called on the legislature to immediately step up and pass Arena's law and make sure that they're going to take care of rolling back these soft on crime policies.
And you still get a Democratic governor, Josh Stein. He signed the law. He said he didn't like all of it, but he liked enough of it, at least the idea of taking a closer look at who should be getting bail and who shouldn't. Now, Governor Cooper's obviously, he's breaking records, literally breaking records with his fundraising. You've been a really prodigious fundraiser yourself over the decades for other people, but that also means you have plenty of people you can step up, who you can ask to step up and help you now.
Yeah, look, we raised $6 million in the first 6 weeks of the campaign. We're very excited about kind of the pace that we're going on. And we also recognize that the Democrats absolutely have a ton of money. They're always going to have a ton of money. I just go back to the presidential cycle last year. Kamala Harris and the Democrats outraised us by $1 billion in that election cycle. You have to have a candidate. You have to have a message. You've got to run a campaign. Those are ultimately going to be the factors. And the Republicans win in North Carolina, despite it being a purple state, because we listen to the voters. We understand the issues they care about, and we put solutions on the table.
Senator Tillis, in announcing he wasn't going to run again, had been under fire from the president, in part for not voting for the Republican so-called Big Beautiful Bill. In part, he said, because he was concerned about Medicaid cuts. What do you tell people that are afraid about losing their health care to those cuts or to the end of Obamacare subsidies if that happens?
Well, we absolutely need to make sure that Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security are going to be there for the most vulnerable and for our seniors in North Carolina and around the country. Full stop, right? But when you look at what the provisions were in the One Big Beautiful Bill, it was a work requirement for able-bodied folks that are under 65. The vast majority of people in North Carolina support that. It was making sure that we don't have illegal aliens who are getting Medicaid. The vast majority of people in North Carolina support that. It was making sure that we don't have people double dealing by being on Medicaid in multiple different states. Again, a big winner. So you look at the provisions that are in that bill, they actually are very strongly supported across North Carolina. Ultimately, what we need to do is make sure that that program is strong enough, sustainable enough to take care of our most vulnerable and our seniors going forward.
Senator Tillis also complained about and talked for a while before announcing his decision about partisan gridlock, and he was just sick of the political theater of it all. You're obviously a quite partisan guy. If you're elected, what's your philosophy on all that? Do you try to work with the other side where you can, or do you just say, let's just win?
No, look, my philosophy is North Carolina first, right? We need to make sure that we have an economy that works for every family and every community in North Carolina. We need to make sure that our kids in our communities are going to be safe. We need to make sure that our men and women in uniform have what they need to be able to protect our interests and allies around the world. I'll work with anybody who is willing to work with me on that type of an agenda. Partisan gridlock, as you said, that has been a part of Washington, D.C. Since I grew up as a kid, and for many, many decades before that, and it is always going to be the way it is. The Constitution set it up so that it is hard to get things done at the federal government level, because then only the important things get done. But as far as my willingness to work with anybody on the behalf of North Carolina, 100%.
You mentioned being a kid. You've been into Republican politics for an awfully long time. What were you, like 15 years old when you worked for Jesse Helms?
Well, so I volunteered for Ronald Reagan's first reelect, and Jesse Helms, who was up for reelect in that race in 1984 as a sophomore in high school, out there knocking on doors and making phone calls and being pulled in. I became a Republican, actually, on the day that Ronald Reagan was sworn in, on January 20th, 1981, because I saw, as he was giving his speech, they cut away and showed the Iranian hostages being released because they knew what was coming if they hadn't released it. That was peace through strength, and I thought, man, I'm with that guy, right? I've been working for this conservative cause for a long time.
Yeah. Did you come from a very politically aware family, or was it just something you came to? It's
just something I came to. My mom was a town librarian. My dad was a CPA. I grew up in middle-class America in a very, very small town in North Carolina called Blowing Rock, up on the Blue Ridge Parkway. But had my first full-time job at 14 and have always worked, but always had an eye towards the political realm. I was able to do an internship when I was in law school and kind of get the bug and had the opportunity to go up to D.C. and work for President George W. Bush and be Elizabeth Dole's chief of staff, and really truly kind of see that the government, when it works right, is all about helping people, and that's ultimately what we want to do.
Well, speaking of helping people, you're on this FEMA Review Council. President Trump has said, look, let's give disaster aid more control over that to the states. They know what's going on the ground. Now, there's people in Western North Carolina that are still waiting for help from Hurricane Helene. That was a year and a week or two ago that hit. What do you tell people there, including Republicans, that are frustrated with the lack of help?
Well, there has been a lot of help. There is a lot of help to go, right? So far, since President Trump took over, the federal government has put $6.5 billion plus into relief into Western North Carolina. 97% of the roads are complete. 97% of the bridges are rebuilt. The debris has been removed by the Corps of Engineers. A lot of the conversations we're having right now are about reimbursements for the debris removal, for the cleanup, making sure that the streams and the waterways are cleaned up. And there is a lot of work that needs to be done with that. He did ask me to be on the FEMA Review Council, where we need to have a very hard look at how FEMA operates, right? And the fact is, the federal government should not be the first responders when we have storms like this. I mean, it really is, let the counties, kind of execute in terms of the recovery for the storms. The states need to oversee it, and the federal government needs to provide support for it. But those are things that we need to work through. And I agree with the president that it really does need to be the states that are leading the charge on this, and that the federal government would provide very, very important support for us.
If you're elected, you'll have 2 years of the Trump presidency, and then, you stay in the Senate, and the White House moves on from there. Where does the party go when he's become the party? Where does it go in down the road?
Republicans have an amazing bench. When you think about the talent that we have in this administration right now, whether it's the vice president or it's Secretary Rubio or any number of other folks that are in the cabinet, you look at the governors that we have all across this country, Ron DeSantis, Glenn Youngkin, others that we think about, even members of the House and the Senate. There is a lot of talent in the Republican Party. The key is that President Trump remade this party, and it is now focused on the working men and women of America, and it is focused on a conversation with every family and every community. That can't change. We cannot go back to the old Republican Party. What we need to do is make sure that we're going to continue to fight for every American family, for every American community, and as long as we do that, I think the Republicans will have a very long run.
Do you think that the president has any interest in being a kingmaker, and when he's out of office, he will still have a big voice in terms of who gets nominated if he wants, and maybe even who his successor is if he wants?
Well, I think he will. The president is a man of vision, and he's a man of ideas, right? And so, what he wanted to do, the very first time he came down the escalator in New York and announced that he was going to run back in 2015, it was about rebuilding our economy, restoring our southern border, and making sure that America was respected around the world again. Those are the same pillars that he ran on in 2020. He ran on in 2024. That's what he did during his first term. That's exactly what he's doing right now. And so as long as that is the driving vision for the Republican Party, I think the Republican Party is going to do very well in the elections.
Michael Whatley, trying to win his own campaign as a Republican candidate for Senate in North Carolina. Michael, nice to meet you. Good luck.
Good to see you. Thanks, sir.